Welcome back, everybody. We're talking silver. Friday, we saw silver with almost a $4 intraday correction. We're talking crowd psychology. We're going to talk about the lack of Libertads for sale at the big Mexican banks. And of course, today's showcase piece is the 2011 Silver Libertad. Stay tuned.
Ladies and gentlemen, your host,
We ended the week Friday in silver with a correction of almost $4 intraday. The overnight session was very close to 54.50, and around 1 o'clock in Eastern on the afternoon, it almost hit $50.50 with a little bounce back. So intraday, the maximum correction about $4, which with such a volatile swing and with a lot of new investors coming on board, a lot of folks ask, when is the best time to hop in? The answer to that question is really nobody knows. At least I can certainly say I don't know, and I don't think the grand majority of other people know. It's why I've shown a favor, as you've seen in previous videos. I favor long-term charts. I love monthly charts. I love quarterly charts because it lets you see the big picture. It lets you see the big trend. It lets you see a comparison of different asset classes and kind of what's in favor and what is not. I warn that you have to do your own due diligence, or you have to consult with a professional, because there's a lot of content out there, a lot of videos, a lot of information. For example, one of the big things in the news when it comes to silver, the U.S. apparently added silver to the critical minerals list. At least it's in draft, it's going through a review, and it's very close to being finalized. And I saw one of these quote-unquote gurus on one of these videos say that, every time they're adding one of these new minerals into the list, the spot price of them within a 5-year time band at least like triples. It was kind of the claim he made. And I'm like, you know what? Let me validate that. Let's see if that's really true. And it started to be true. I found the case of lithium. It went up in price. I found the price of tin. That was another one that had been added in prior years. That went up in price. But then, I found instances where that was simply not true. It was not true for nickel, and it was not true for zinc. So there's a lot of content out there, including me. So whenever I'm mentioning stuff to you, you should go and research it further and not just say, oh, I'm going to take him for face value. Take it with a grain of salt and make sure that what folks mention or they reference, that you can validate it and find other sources that can validate that information. I've been seeing this meme making the rounds all over social media. I couldn't find a particular post in the last couple minutes handy to talk about it. So this you can find a meme generator for any of the famous memes out there, and this one is called the Q meme generator, and then you kind of put whatever text above. But this one's making the rounds all over social media, over X, Facebook, Instagram, or whatnot, and it's essentially showing, when there's one person in line for just $2,000 gold, and now gold at over $4,000, and you have a huge crowd, a huge line, and that really focuses on something that I think is critical and paramount to understanding how to invest, and that is crowd psychology. If I had to summarize crowd psychology in just a couple of lines, it would essentially be, when everybody is on board and everybody agrees, then ultimately who is left to buy that particular asset? You have to consider that, hey, this asset is an overcrowded, it's probably overpriced at this juncture. It's essentially time to bail out. And then vice versa, if nobody cares for it, that $2,000 line, when nobody cares for it, there's no interest. Most pundits are telling you, oh, stay away from this. That's probably the time you want to hop on board, because most of the people, most of the crowd are not seeing the value. I consider this one of the tomes, one of my favorite texts as it pertains to crowds, Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. Great book. I read this book over 15 years ago. Really good one. Another one that's talked by a lot of investors. This was originally a French book written in French, and this is the English translation, The Crowd, by Gustave Le Bon. Another very useful book. So I really wanted to make it aware and kind of emphasize how important crowd psychology is when it comes to investing. I have an interesting story on crowds. It's probably my first memory on starting to understand crowd psychology. I just started college. It was the summer after college, and I was just looking to make some money on the side. And the job I found was essentially, they called it marketing. They had a fancy term. Everyone uses very fancy vernacular for certain jobs. And all it was going around handing free samples of stuff. And the particular client for the company I was working for was Starbucks, and we were doing promotions of Frappuccino. So we were essentially going to very crowded areas and handing out samples of Frappuccino for folks to try. And I'll never forget, we were just setting up for a day, very crowded venue, just beginning to set up. Everything's ready to go. The cups are out, ready to pour out the first one, and I say, hey, free samples, free samples. And this guy looks at me dead in the eye, and I have my arm extended out with the cup, and he has a look as if I'm offering him poison. And he just turns his head with disgust and walks away. And what's so interesting is then within half an hour, we have a huge line. We have like 4 tables across, about 6 of us handing out free samples. And now suddenly he was walking back in the opposite direction, and he gets on the line. And I will just never forget, I made it a point to make eye contact with this guy. And I'd made eye contact with him because he was not on my line. And I said, wow, look at this guy. He had looked at me as if we're offering him poison when it was empty and no one was there to accept free samples. And now it's massively crowded, and this guy has an interest now in a free sample. And that is what I remember as my first kind of experience on crowd psychology. Speaking of books, the book I have here now on the screen is one I've recommended many times on this channel. It's the Whitman Encyclopedia of Mexican Money, Volume 2, by the late Don Bailey. Great book, highly recommended. This will really captivate you. It has a whole chapter just dedicated to Libertads, and I call Libertads now but the gateway drug to Mexican numismatics, because once you love Libertads, once you start reading this book and read the other chapters, you really get captivated, and you're reading about the culture and the history, and then next thing you know, you're starting collections of other coins in Mexican coinage. Just a couple of things that are making the rounds in the news, and like I said, do your research, see what's out there, make an informed decision before you take on any risk, consult a professional. So this was actually about a month old, essentially, but it was only starting to be talked about this week a lot in a lot of the YouTube channels. Basically, Morgan Stanley has said that they favor a 60-20-20 portfolio. And what they mean by that is traditionally they've recommended a 60-40. A 60-40 meaning your portfolio consists of 60% stocks, 40% bonds. And now they're essentially saying we recommend 60% stocks, 20% bonds, 20% gold. So that's a huge shift for one of these big institutions to make this type of recommendation. And this happened around mid-September. So from mid-September till now, we saw gold rally $500, give or take. This video came out yesterday, but I just happened to watch it first thing this morning. I saw it show up on my X feed, and it starts at minute 5 in the video. It was overtime with Bill Maher. He has Mark Cuban and Andrew Ross Sorkin, and they're talking the markets. And at minute 5, they're talking gold. And essentially, well, I tell you, pay attention to crowd psychology. All 3 of them were making fun of gold. All 3 of them. I'm not going to play it here. You're seeing what video it is, so you could play it on your own. But they basically all make fun of gold. When gold is nearing a generational top, they will not be making fun of gold. When all the pundits, when everybody is on board, that's when you have to start being careful and saying, maybe now is the time to head to the exits. I had talked about in the last video how there was someone on Facebook who had mentioned, that the banks in Mexico, the big banks, are no longer selling Libertads when it was customary for them to buy and sell Libertads. And so I had referenced that one person from one of the Facebook groups, and then after the video was out, somebody replied in Reddit saying, yes, it's true, and they're seeing that it is in fact happening, that they will only buy them back from you they are not selling. And here I had posted this on Instagram. Basically, here is Banco Azteca, one of the big banks down there, and with the announcement of that they're suspending the sale of Libertads, and essentially they're only going to buy them back. So there's a lot of talk of, they're potentially melting these things. Either they might be melting them because it's going to be profitable for them. The spot price has increased substantially, or they're melting them because they don't want to have to buy new silver out on the market if they want to mint either more 2025s or their plans for minting 2026s. So it's conjecture right now what's going to happen, but it's very clear they're not selling anymore. So the biggest speculation right now in terms of Libertads is the 2024 Libertads, because we have sufficient data points to make kind of a meaningful conjecture. We don't really have a lot of visibility in terms of 2025. I do believe we will see more. There was indications that, the process was industrialized and tested, but just not mass produced. But for 2024, what we do know is we kind of have an idea of more or less how many have been distributed, an estimate, because as I mentioned, Banco de Mexico lists on their website by year the number of coins put into circulation. But what that means does not mean the coins put into circulation in the given year are the Libertads of that year. They can be a mix of various years, but definitely the bias is for the newest year, in particular because 2024 was authorized to mint like 700,000. And you mean if they put the number of coins they put into circulation, it's been estimated that more or less, there's only been about 300,000 or so put into circulation. And that's just an estimate because we don't know. There could be a chunk of 2023s that have been put into circulation this year. It could also be some 2022s in the mix. We don't know. So a safe estimate is really about 300,000 of them have been put into circulation out of what was authorized to be like 700,000. So at 300,000, we're more along the lines of being more towards the scare side, being a key date. And the person I had referenced last time around, David Richmond from Facebook on one of the Libertad Facebook groups, he's even speculating that it could be less than 100,000. Mathematically, I don't see that per se, but I mean, everyone's entitled to their opinion. And to be honest, he was one of the first people to talk about and share with everybody that, hey, the banks have stopped selling Libertads. So I kind of listened to what he has to say. Oh my God, let me find him manually. One last thing I want to talk about before we talk about the 2011 Libertads, the U.S. Mexican Numismatic Association, they're having their annual coin show. It ends today. It was this week. Started on the 16th, ends today, and one of my friends, Scott Doll, Doll, he's on Instagram. This is his page. He goes to the show, it seems like every year, and just in terms of what's hot right now, it's the first year he said that pre-Columbians are really selling. Prices are really going up on those. I've only ever done one video where I talked about pre-Columbians and went into some detail, but I have mentioned them several times over that to me, they are like Libertads on steroids. If you think Libertad mintages are low, pre-Columbians are like, wow, they're just super low. And what he is saying that is selling that's hot right now, aside from the pre-Columbians, is the caballitos, a lot of the revolutionary coins, and the Republic 8 reales. Those are, he's seeing a lot of demand, a lot of high prices on those. Just thought I'd share. On the last video, the focus was the 2010 Libertad, and the mintage was $1 million on those. Now we are on the 2011, and the mintage is even higher. It's 1.2 million, so it is pretty much towards the end of the continuum of least scarce, most abundant. But as I've highlighted in the past, we don't know in terms of Libertads that have been melted over the years. I talked about last time about the insight Carlos Ajo had shared that, you know, there was a whole era of Libertads where they weren't as in demand, they didn't command premiums, and jewelers would just buy them because it was just much easier to buy them, go to the bank and buy them, as opposed to going and buying somewhere silver shot. So a lot of them have been melted over the years, and then we really have to depend on market prices and looking at sold comps to get a better idea, not only of the demand, but essentially having some type of line of sight into how truly scarce they are by that price. Let's take a peek at the graded populations at the two major grading companies, NGC, PCGS. NGC, oh my God, you gotta fix this website. I've mentioned it before. Everything's out of order, so I actually have to use the filters every time to look up a year and kind of filter down, like I did here, to 2011. So 2011 Silver Libertads NGC, thus far up to date, 729 have been graded. Top pop is the MS70, and there's 113 of those. That is the NGC side. On PCGS, we actually have many more here. We have 1,572 that have been graded by PCGS. Top pop of 70 with 237. As I mentioned in the past, on Reddit, in the subreddit Libertad Coins, you can pull up my old historical posts, and I have kind of kept track over the years since I started collecting Libertads seriously in 2021. Kind of, you know, what the total population has been, what the top pop has been, and how that's trended over the years. So we have said at NGC right now there's currently 729. In 2021 there was only 250. Then again, when I took another snapshot around mid 2023, it was 484. And this post was 7 months ago, and it was 676 7 months ago versus 729 currently today. Looking at the top pop, the MS70, back in 2021, there was only 46 of them. 2023, there were 78 of them. 7 months ago, there was 94 of them. And now we have 113 of them. So they're just trending up, and worth highlighting again, pretty much for most years, less than 1% of the mintage has been graded. So that always allows for a bulk submission to show up that could really shift prices drastically, at least in the short term. Last but not least, we're going to take a look at the sold comps on eBay for 2011. So you make sure you have your sold listings filter turned on, and that here is on the left pane. You scroll all the way to the bottom, make sure that's checked off. I like to sort by ended recently. And first thing off, something I've mentioned in the past, and this really stands out, good to talk about again, is if you buy in standalone coins, things come out more expensive because it's a single coin. A lot of times you get a shipping charge, and it comes out more expensive per unit wise. And so, you know, if you're just missing the last couple, understandable, especially key dates, they're quite expensive. There's no way around it. But if you're just starting out, this right here is a great example of where you could potentially get a better price by the coin. So this was a group of 18 Libertads from 2011 to 2020. And so I've mentioned this in the past, highly advised, if you're just starting out, look for coin lots of Libertads so you could get a bunch of years all in one shot. It does tend to come out cheaper than buying one at a time. Especially, I see it a lot on like Instagram and these Facebook groups. People go and they buy the single coin, and then they're being charged $5 shipping, $5 on a single one. that's a substantial markup. That's not trivial at all. Moving on, we have a standalone here that sold for $71.95. This is another one of these shady grading companies, ICG. Someone paid $72 for it. I don't advise you to be buying these unless they're pretty much equivalent to the raw price. Otherwise, I wouldn't chase these strange companies. ICS, the last one I talked about it, like I say, I like to pronounce ANAX. I would stay away from those companies. They don't grade as critically. It's much easier to get some of these in these types of grading companies than it is NGC or PCGS. Moving on, another 2011 here sold $60. Here we go. ANAX $125. I'm not sure who bought that. Bad move. Don't get caught up in this. Do not pay for this grading company $125, especially because that label right there is their more modern label, and that label is the one where like they hand out 70s like hotcakes. And I'd mentioned to you, and I did it specifically with 2010s because at the time 2010s it was very hard to get a 70, but as we know, there's already 270s out now, and I had sent a bunch of ANAX ones. I cracked them out of the slab, sent them to NGC, and I mean, not even close to 70, not even a 69, not even a 68, pretty much 67s. This is a 5 ounce, so we're not going to talk about that. Here we're looking at an MS70, but from PCGS, and that went for $209. This is an MS69 from NGC that went for $84.99. Here's October 10th, a raw one, $55. October 9th, a raw one, $62. October 9th, that's a proof that doesn't count. And then this is a little like thing people go nuts over is the toning. So this toned one sold for $399.99 on October 8th. I don't know, the thing with toning, and I noticed the trend over the years when the crowd per se started to get like really hyped up and excited about toners, they started shooting up the prices. But I noticed, I call them baked coins, because essentially you can establish artificial conditions to give coins this type of look. And because I'm seeing the availability of them, although you don't see a lot of them as compared to just like clean ones like this, not clean, but fresh uncirculated ones, the fact that relative wise toners in of themselves, I'm seeing an exponential amount versus what I used to see, leads me to believe that people are doing artificial toning to these coins. So I don't get involved with this. I'm not really intrigued at all by toned coins. I don't think most collectors are. And the fact that games are being played with artificial toning, I would highly advise to stay away from them. Because then, they're not going to be as liquid. There's a lot less people, a whole lot less people that go after toners. So the liquidity pool of potential buyers is just so much smaller. So why take a gamble, spend $399.99, or you could be paying $60 for a BU, one without flaws that, as the price of spot silver continues to go up, these will appreciate along with that. At $399, how much more are you really going to get a year from now? Let's say spot silver goes up, let's say 75. How much more over $399 are you going to get for this toned one? I'm not really sure, and I don't think most people are really sure. And just to finish up here, here's Whitman's Encyclopedia of Mexican Money, Volume 2, by the late Don Bailey. Just a quick preview. Chapter 9, all about Libertads, a whole chapter dedicated to Libertads. Highly recommend this book. I'm not getting paid at all to talk about this book, but this book really was the book that got me interested. I already built out a silver Libertad collection, and this book really opened the floodgates in terms of getting really interested in other Mexican coins, which are as low mintage as Libertads or even lower.
Click that subscribe button for more data-driven coin analysis.